Hello everybody and welcome to this next video. In this video we're going to be learning first the basics of Unity and how to code in it using C#, the main coding language for it, and then how to do 2D movement and jumping at this time. Okay, so let's get into the first one and start setting it up. So to set up a code script in Unity, you need to click right on either here in assets or in hierarchy, and then you can use create and go to C# script. Otherwise, the other way to do it is because scripts actually, if you go into a character, scripts are technically just components that you've made then you've coded, because all of these components obviously have code behind them, and so any script we make is also its own component. So if we actually click add component, then we can type in whatever we want it. Let's name it character move, and then if you click new script and just wait for that to load, there, name, and just click create and add, and then suddenly it's made it. If you have downloaded Visual Studio, which I strongly recommend you do, then you can use that because it just makes everything way easier. If you're still using Monoscript, then that works too, but Visual Studio just has way more features. But if we just double click our script now, it'll show up with a hashtag because that's the symbol for C#. Then we can just wait for it to load up Visual Studio, and then we'll be able to get this working. Okay, so as soon as this loads up, we can check that out in Visual Studio. Okay, so I've loaded in, and this is what I found here. This is what automatically shows up whenever you load up in any code editor or like Visual Studio, Xcode, whatever, or Monoscript. This is what you'll always find. And this is, so let's go through this all. First, we have our using tags. Using tags are just like things that you are using in your script, like things that Unity has made, like long scripts that Unity has made to make it a lot easier for you to code things. If they're gray like this, it means we're not currently using them. And if they're like showing up and they're completely opaque, then that means we are using them. So firstly, we're going to go into this public class, and it is called character move. A class is basically just a setup in Unity that just shows that all of this is contained inside this class, and there can be, and yeah, a class is also basically a script. Then this mono behavior just means that we're using Unity engine.mono behavior, which is one of the things that comes from here, and like it derives from there as we say it. And yeah, then coming in here we have our voids. So these are functions here. Functions are things that are just called, like, so if we're writing a long script, like it's writing whatever and then there's whatever, and we want to like call something here, and we want to say if this happens then we want to call this function here, and then we want to do a bunch of code that's going to take up a lot of lines. To keep it neat and clean, we can just say run function hello, and boom, it'll run that function. So that just makes it a lot easier to sort out code. So the functions we have here are void start and void update. Start and update are just the ones that are automatically provided by Unity. There are a few more that we may use further in the series, but these are the main ones you're going to use when we discuss coding. So start is just called before we even load up Unity, and then update is called every frame that it is loaded. So in the void start, we're just going to quickly look at a few variables here. Variables are the things that make up coding in itself, and so these are the main variables that you can use in Unity. We have int, which just means an integer. Then along with that, we also have, then we can like name, this is how we actually set it up. We name it like, say, level count, and then yeah, and we've created that. And then we can, then some more we have are string, which is just a string of numbers. Integer is a single whole number, and so we can actually also set it here. And let's say it's 9. We have 9. That is the number he's on, like our player. Then string, we can call it, I don't know, input. For the input, they've set it, and then just call it. We always want to, whenever we're working with strings or any non-numerical things and that we're creating ourselves, we always put them in double quotation marks. And then we can just write input is player name. So yeah. And then you always put a semicolon at the end of anything when you're doing this. After string, we have a lot more. We have a lot, but I'm just going to quickly go through the main ones. And so we have our character, which just means a single character. This can, it doesn't sound useful, but it does have its uses. Then we also have things like double, which is anything like dot something. Then we have the more than often use, like instead of int, a lot of people use float, because what a float does, it actually saves a lot of space, because as it says, it actually the number that you put in there, it isn't it can be a decimal or normal, but it can float around just slightly. Like if we put in 1, it might be like 1.00001 instead. And because of this, because it can do this, it saves a lot of space. So that's that. And now we are gonna be working on our 2D movement script right after this. So before we learn 2D movement, we also want to learn a few more variables that are used and created by Unity. There's vector 3 or 2 for us in our case, because it basically is just a setup of two numbers that like are our x and y position here. So x would be along the side and y would be up and down. And yeah. Then we also have vector 3, which is just x, y, and also z, which is depth. And yeah, those are the main ones you want to know. Also, any single component that is there, that is like creatable, there is it is also a type of variable. Like rigid body is a component, and so rigid body is technically also a variable. As you can see, it turns green. And then, even since we've created this component here, essentially, the script is a component we've created, character move is also its own type of script or component, and so it is also a variable type. Okay, so now to make movement for our characters. In our character, we're just going to go and add a rigid body 2D. You've probably already done this, and for all our colliders, I've just added a separate one for each one. Separate capsule collider. Now we're going to create a new script. I've just called it character move. And in it, let's go. The first thing we're going to do is just create a new float called speed. And just equal that to 5f. You need to make sure to add the f because it's just important to show that it is a float, even though it's written there. It'll be explained in later videos. Now we're going to go into update and create a vector 3 and call it movement. It's going to be equal to a new vector 3, and what we're going to give it now is actually write this down: input dot get axis, and then add some more brackets and speech marks, and then in it we're just going to write horizontal with a capital T. So what this does is Input.getAxis horizontal, what it does is it gives you a number. It can be either 1 or -1. -1 is if you press A or left, and then positive, and then just +1 is if you press D or right. Then the rest, we're just going to do 0, 0. Now we're just going to go, and in the next line we're going to do transform dot position. So this will take our position, and plus equals, so add our vector and add movement to it. And then we're going to just do this is times it. So just that by another new thing called time dot delta time. What that does is it takes the time since since the last frame occurred, and because update is called once per frame, and so it'll take the time since it was last called, and then make sure that we move accordingly. So it's not like if you have a higher frame rate, like if you have 60 FPS, you're moving at double the speed of someone who has a 30 FPS computer. And then we're just gonna do times speed, and just finish that off. Now we can just one more thing we want to do is actually attribute this float, and to do that we're going to do square brackets and write serialized field. That's an attribution. It's a new thing. What it does is it makes sure that we can actually access the float speed inside Unity instead of having to come back to our script and change it every single time. So we're just going to hit Control S and go back to Unity. Now if we play our game, we can see that our script is actually, just wait for it to load and drop our character onto our level, and we can see that our script is actually working. I'm just pressing A and D right now. Of course right now he's a little wobbly, wonky, and can fall off the platform, and we haven't actually added jumping. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, so now let's add movement. In our character script, what we're going to do now is go into update again, create some new lines, and what we're going to do is if input, we're going to use the input class again, input dot get button down, and it'll check, so that'll check whether a certain button is down, and we're going to call it jump. This is another built-in one, like horizontal. You might actually be thinking right now, why can we just say horizontal and suddenly it knows that we're talking about A and D? That's actually built into Unity, and we can change that inside. We'll do that later. And jump is another built-in one. And so if it's being pressed, then create some new curly brackets and run a new function we'll just call jump. There. Now let's actually create that function. So now we're going to do a new thing called creating functions. How we do this is we write void, and then we call it jump, and we'll just add some curly brackets, and there. So what we're going to do is, game object, that will take this object in the game, dot get component. Then we're going to add these weird little brackety things, and we're going to write rigid body 2D, because we're going to try and get the rigid body, dot dot add force, and then in it we're just going to give it some information, and we're just going to add 0 on the x-axis. Just wait for that, because it'll take all of our information in x, y, and z. X is horizontal, so 0 on the x-axis. For the y-axis, we'll take, let's just call it jump height. We'll create that in a second, and then 0 for, and then actually, what we're going to do now is then do. And to do this, we're actually going to need to put some more brackets and just call this we're just going to make a new vector2 and add some brackets, and that will be jump height. I'll just show you exactly what's happening here in a second. There, so it'll take vector, so it'll make a new vector2 that'll take 0 for the x and jump height as whatever we make it. And then we're just going to add another comma and write force mode 2D dot impulse. So force mode 2D, after that you can add either dot impulse or dot force. So force will push it like slightly like that, and impulse will just give it a big impulse up. And then we're just going to add that down, and we're just in our serialized fields, we're just going to create a new float called jump height, and just set that to 4. We can test it out and set it up later because that is serialized. If you want to add a new variable that isn't serialized, just leave a space in between, and if I write a new variable here, it won't be serialized. And we can just save this and test it out now. And we can just test that out by clicking play now. And as soon as this loads up, we can just add some jumping. This is actually slow, and this is where we can actually test out our serialized fields. So in it, now that I've added it in, we can change our speed here, but jump height isn't actually showing up. So what we're going to do to fix that is going back into our script. All we're going to need to do is just change the we're going to actually need to add another serialized field. There is a more complicated way to make it choose everything and serialize everything underneath it, but that's for another video. It takes quite some time to set up. It can take quite some time to set up. So just click play, and in our character, we now have jump height. So if I actually click down on this, that's pretty low, so I'll put that up to maybe 8, because I want him to jump at least double what we just did now. Then if we click back on here, that looks pretty good. Now he can jump over our level and play around. He's a little unstable. We'll fix that later by giving him more body mass and stuff. And then if we just stop play, you'll actually notice that the jump height has actually gone back to 4. That's because if you change anything in play mode, you might think that, oh no, I didn't want this to happen. So it actually changes it all back when play mode ends. So we liked the number 8, and we can just write 8 there, and that looks good. Then one more thing is just in collision detection in your rigid body, set it to continuous. We're not having any problems right now, but if we do encounter any problems in the future, that will really help. So that's it for this video. Remember to like and subscribe for more videos in this series, and see you later.